to Fit to Speak from the Archives. I'm Eugene Obah, glad as ever to be with you. We've got a lot to get to in part two of the conversation I held on Thanksgiving Day 2020 about the aftermath of the US presidential election with the biggest panel we've had to date. So let's begin. Hello and welcome to Fit to Speak. I'm Eugene Obah. So glad to have you with us. Long time no see. I'm sure that by now many of you have had your Thanksgiving dinners. I will be having mine a little later. But first, a feast for the mind as we continue our conversation about politics, the election, and where things go from here with Marcus Dowling, Kristen Foca, Taylor Maupin, and Raheem Dawodu Jr. We first talk about the role that the mainstream media played in electing current President Donald Trump and what lessons have been learned, if any. And let's talk about the role of misinformation here. Let's talk about the media and the way that things are going, because there is a massive role, especially here in the United States, the role that the media plays in all of the elections. Here's a question, and I'll kind of go around in the room again to everybody about this. What, if anything, has the media learned from 2016? Did the media learn anything from 2016? Because here's my thing, folks, and I'm just going to kind of go riff on this a little bit, because there's been a lot of talk back in 2016 about the role that Russia played and blah, 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 blah. But I find that the mainstream media played a significantly greater role in electing current, now outgoing President Donald Trump than anything Russia could have done. When I look at what's been going on with the mainstream media, I think that's been the real interference. And you see CNN, they covered Trump's speeches wall to wall in the run up to the election. No context, no news value whatsoever, and that sort of thing. And then you had CBS, Les Moonves, who was the former head of CBS, who said that Trump is not good for America, but damn was he good for our ratings. So we know that the mainstream media model, folks, is driven by the profit motive. And there may very well be in the coming years some shifting in terms of kind of sort of the pecking order in terms of which media outlets come out on top, who doesn't. I was seeing an article from the Wall Street Journal earlier on and talking about maybe $200 million to Newsmax, that Trump's people were thinking of buying up Newsmax. And then, all the discontent with Fox News when Fox News was the first outlet to call Arizona for Joe Biden. So let me start with you, Taylor. What would you like to see going forward from the media as we head into the midterms, as we head to 2024 and beyond? What do you make of all of this?
Touching on Fox News again, they also cut off the press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, when she was listing the evidence that they have gathered for fraud in this election. It was the whole last election cycle and up until recently was concerned with election fraud from 2016. So that's election fraud in this country is nothing new. The kind of quick to move on and move forward and brush it under the rug by the mainstream media is new. So it's nice to see that they're all in lockstep and keeping with the same message. But yeah, it needs to be like it was before under regulation, actually, where you had to have both sides of the argument come to the table and be fair. I forget the exact year that.
You talk about the fairness doctrine you were talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
This was during Reagan. This was during Reagan's time.
Yes. Yeah. Something like that, I think, would help a lot. The profit motive, I don't think there's any way of getting away from that. But the rise of alternate media, this wonderful podcast and others like it, this is the time to shine for platforms like this. So Because people are turning away from their trusted sources and looking for new opportunities. And the rise of Newsmax is a case in point, and this show is another.
And I appreciate your kind words, Taylor, about this program and everything that we're doing. And let me have Raheem respond to some of the stuff that Taylor just said here. Yeah, you look at Fox News. What do you make of what's been going on over there? Because they have, like, Neil Cavuto did indeed go away from Kayleigh McEnany's presser. Now, I do think that a lot of the claims that are made, I'm not sure are in good faith, but he did cut off, well, not so much cut off, but turn away from that.
We want every legal vote to be counted, and we want every illegal vote to be...
I just think we have to be very clear. She's charging, the other side is welcoming fraud and welcoming illegal voting. Unless she has more details to back that up, I can't in good countenance continue showing you this. I want to make sure that maybe they do have something to back that up, but that's an explosive charge to make.
What do you make of that? And, is that the kind of thing going forward where it's like, okay, maybe the corporate media, they will do these live either fact checks or they start cutting away from pressers. What do you see there?
Well, so I think the original question also was, have they learned a lesson from 2016? And I'm going to have to say no and at all, because the issue is that the media, the problem with American media, especially when you get to the corporate levels, is that they believe that fairness equals being able to have both sides of an argument speak. And so if I come to you and I say that you tell me, Eugene, hey, Raheem, the sky's very blue today. I'm like, no, Eugene, the sky is green, or the sky's red. Can't you see it? If I was on Jake Tapper's show, for instance, he would say, well, Eugene, he's saying the sky is red. How do you feel about that? They wouldn't tell me that I'm wrong or that it's incorrect. And so that's a problem. Even these claims that we're hearing now, and I don't want to get on you, Taylor, but your claims about the voting fraud stuff, that's just, there's nothing there to that. There's no there for that, and that's why these cases keep getting thrown out of court. I mean, we can react. That's
Not
that's
all
whole
getting
different
thrown out.
conversation. They went out of 16, whatever. But the point is, like, there isn't a there. Yet the media, unfortunately, likes to do the both sides stuff and allow both sides to you validate a crazy, wild accusation that's not at all grounded in any truth or reality, and you validate it by saying, well, how do you respond to that? You can't respond to stuff that's not true. You can't say these are your facts and these are your facts. There's only one fact. There's only one truth. And in our country, when you get to the mainstream media, they're so interested in the horse race, and they're so interested in having contention and conflict. And you see it in, like, the news media, you see it in sports media, you see it in so many different medias. People are so interested in having conflict and allowing wrong statements to enter their airways, and no one's actually having a journalistic integrity to step up and say, no, that's wrong. Let's actually stick to the facts. It's a wholly American phenomenon. It's the weirdest. It's because our country is so focused on profits. The further up you go in the media chain, when you get to that corporate level, when you get to, like, your MSNBCs, Fox, CNNs, or wherever, is where you're allowed to spew nonsense, all in the name of, this is my side of the argument. It's not, there's no side of the argument. There's facts and there's truth and there isn't. There's truth and fiction. And for so long in this country, it's been allowed to have fiction validated, and it's wrong. It's unfit. It's not right. And because of that, you have people that believe wild and crazy stuff, or you have people that are seeing and distrusting the media, and they're running to alternative outlets, but their alternative outlets are even more crazier and more spooky and more like ridiculous. And they haven't learned a lesson because there's no incentive for them to learn a lesson, because everybody still, last week for the election, for instance, right? I remember I didn't watch it because I was like, I'm not going to watch election night. There's nothing that's going to be decided on election night. What are we doing? The presidential campaign is going to be decided on election night. Yet I heard people complaining at my job or people I interact with, or you see them on social media, like, oh, I've been up since I've been up watching this 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, why are you watching this 2 o'clock in the morning? The results aren't going to come in until later on in the week. We're still having mail-in ballots. What are you doing? Because the media never informed anybody that, oh, they did inform me, but it was more so like a little like disclaimer at the bottom, like when you do like those prescription drug commercials that go by real fast, and they say like, oh, this can give you this, these are side effects and all this stuff. They didn't actually tell anybody. They didn't inform the American public that, yeah, we're not going to find out anything tonight because there are mail-in ballots that are going to come in many days later, and people were pissed off at the vote. People not getting the votes in on time, when this is literally what happens every year for an election. People, that vote counts aren't done the night of; they're done like weeks later, because it takes time to read millions to register millions of ballots. Yet they did a terrible job of informing people of what's happening, and people were up stressing out for 3 or 4 days waiting for election results, when it's like, hey, like, this isn't going to come in until like at the earliest, like Thursday or Friday, and we find out on Saturday. So yeah, our country is our media is so fixated on getting people like inflamed and triggered and mad, and seeing conflict, and allowing unfactual stuff to be on our airways, and validating that we haven't gotten to the point that they just see this and they see a profit behind it. So it's not helping the American public learn anything, and we're not gleaning anything from it. And maybe that's not the purpose of media. Maybe media isn't for education. I thought it was, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know, but it's infuriating when you're hearing over and over either false statements, lies, or just peddling people along, knowing that that what you're peddling along to isn't at all like a factual reality. So I don't know. I was really frustrated by a lot of coverage last week. Thankfully I didn't watch it. I was just frustrated by the reaction to the coverage. So I didn't watch it. I knew what was going to happen, but they were so busy wanting to raise people's blood pressure and keep people viewed, that it was just crazy, and I don't understand it. And we've seen it. Shoot, even today, I think it was ABC This Week. Like 4 years ago, we were interviewing Trump supporters, teaching them about, asking like, how Trump supporters this, and we need to learn from them. And then today we're interviewing Trump supporters saying that they don't believe that Trump lost election, or they thought it was unfair. And it's like, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Why are we still doing the same song and dance? I don't understand it. Like, let's stick to reality. Let's be like truthful about this. I'm sorry for going so long, but it's just something that really is passionate to me. Like, I hate lies in the media, and I hate seeing this same game happen over and over and over, and people just falling for it because we've done a poor job of educating people of how media is. So I'm sorry. I'm just really frustrated.
You're good, Raheem. Because again, there needs to be a fundamental shift in the way that the U.S. media really does business in terms of journalism. Because even I found myself reading international outlets and getting some of the reactions to the results, and everything else. And it's just a pity how far down American journalism has gone. But Kristen, what do you see here in terms of what the media has done, especially talking about disinformation, especially among certain candidates? I remember, like, the Washington Post. I saw so many anti-Bernie editorials. Remember that the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos. He has a lot of interests, there, and that sort of thing. So, what about that? Where do we go from here in terms of the media, in terms of covering these candidates fairly? What do you think?
Well, I think that covering candidates fairly, of course, is a top priority. I also think that our, mainstream media, whether that's CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, I also think that something that they do poorly is they seem to only be able to cover one subject at a time for like an entire week. And that's something that that was a challenge for me as a communications director working on a campaign. And I would get these opportunities with CNN to have an interview with my candidate. And then it was like, oh, never mind, Trump has COVID. Every single person has to only talk about that. And so this interview that we did, this quote that you just gave us, yeah, like I can't run it now. And so, I think that that's another issue here. And as far as informing voters, I mean, yeah, I feel like it's wrong that I don't feel like news has talked nearly enough about the fact that the House has passed 2 COVID relief bills that, the Senate won't take up. And that's not even talking about the numerous other bills that Mitch McConnell just will not even bring to a vote. And so, he was just reelected. And a lot of that is because the American people, they just hear, well, the government doesn't work. We're not, people our elected officials aren't doing anything for us. That's really not true. And so I think that it goes beyond elections, and it's not just covering candidates fairly, but also talking about what is happening on an everyday basis in a well-rounded and informative way. And I think that if people understood what was actually happening on a daily basis, why don't we have healthcare reform? Why has the Affordable Care Act just really been left to implode, essentially, and there are a lot of reasons for that, and people don't really understand why. And it's because the mainstream media doesn't really talk about what Congress is doing day in and day out. Instead, they're just focusing on sensational headlines and things that are going to be polarizing, and really talking about one thing for an entire week. And over the last 4 years, that has primarily been something that Donald Trump tweeted. So I think that we have a major reckoning when it comes to news media moving forward, and it doesn't just have to do with campaigns.
Absolutely. And Marcus, what about that? What about the point that Kristen pretty much made, is that kind of sort of the chasing of the shiny object, if you will, when it comes to what is being covered on CNN and Fox and that sort of thing, and then what isn't. What do you see here, Marcus?
Well, I can definitely, I'll relate this to the notion of social psychology. Ultimately, that's what we've turned politics into. And for the media, the excitement of social psychology being what the driving notion is wonderful, because ultimately they're able to manipulate people's emotions by what they put on television. So if the story is that Donald Trump has COVID, then that's going to manipulate far more emotions than like a well-meaning interview with a congressional candidate, which is sad but true. So ultimately, the goal of Trump's regime, for lack of a better term, was to be able to manipulate the media cycle by those methods, and to always stay a step ahead of the story, because ultimately, whatever story happens in the world, if a tree falls in Brooklyn, or if the quick fox jumps over the lazy dog, then the bigger story in the press cycle will always be Donald Trump pushing a button in someone's soul intrinsically. And that's where we are right now. So I think that the biggest issue in regards to moving forward is for politicians, and this is the thing that Biden largely won on, was the idea that he wasn't going to trigger people for 4 years. He was not going to push people's buttons. There's the notion of, well, you don't have to care about what we're doing. You can, when Obama said this, he's like, you don't have to care about what the president's saying, what the vice president's saying, or what they're doing for 4 years. And ultimately what he's saying is that we're going to move away from this psychological game that we were playing with you as the American public, and we're going to get back to the business of running the country first and foremost. And I think that fascinatingly enough, there's a lesson that comes out of this that's important to remember for politics moving forward, is that as much as we place a great onus of high intellectual quotient on the elector, on the population, these are still people at their core who are emotional and have deep core emotional issues that drive how they view politics. And we never really had a person run for elective office at that level that was able to manipulate that and do so well to manipulate that, and to push those buttons for 4 years. So I think that we're going to have to unlearn how to do that, because I think that, especially looking at the far right, not the center right, but the far right, like the alt right, like moving towards that more radical edge, they're going to attempt to do that. But if we keep the mainstream media cycle more center right and center left, then we get away from that psychology that was so toxic for us for 4 years.
I think one of the things that is worth mentioning to the audience is that the model of cable news, and the model of cable news is that, the average age of those that watch CNN, Fox, MSNBC, a lot of the other stuff is over 60. And that 94% of Fox News viewers are white. We mentioned this in the debut episode. So I think the model is going to change most definitely, and I hope that people will turn to independent outlets like this one and so many others that are doing the kind of work that really needs to be done. And I do hope that we get to a point where American journalism will maybe model stuff like what we're trying to do here and that sort of thing. And in thinking about the last question for tonight, folks, I want us to kind of think about this. Where do each of the parties and these candidates, now former candidates, where do they go from here? And before I get deeper into that question, I want to read a passage from the American Conservative, which I found quite fascinating, and I think it may apply to a lot of this stuff here. In looking at why Trump lost. It says here, what went wrong? Trump went wrong. He built his constituency by exposing to America the fundamental political reality of 2016, namely the widening chasm between the middle America and its bi-coastal elites of big media, government officials, think tanks, big tech, burgeoning financial institutions, the federal deep state, and mavens of popular culture. He pulled his voters together into a tight knot of political support born of fear and intimidation and self-interest. But then he couldn't build on it. He could never take his 43% support and find a way to add another 10% by devising policies designed to operate on the political margin. And then the article goes on to talk about Bill Clinton's term of triangulation and talking about how Trump could have had a grand strategy on immigration, on healthcare, and foreign policy, and the use of his language and whatever. But then it goes on to say that Trump could not do any of it. The result was that he could not get beyond his core constituency and hence probably can't be reelected. Now, one thing the offer does kind of get. Now, one thing I will say is that this article was published in September. Okay, this was before the election. And Trump, as of the numbers of this recording, he got more than 43% support. So, Taylor, I'm going to throw this to you. I'm going to kind of combine all of this here. Is this guy correct from the American Conservative? Is this guy correct? And where does Trump go from here? What is his path going forward, especially in 2024? Does he start a new channel? Does he become a kingmaker in terms of the GOP and everything else? What do you see there?
Going forward, it's hard to tell. I'd like to see these processes laid out, and maybe there won't be a 2024 to discuss because he'll still be president. Maybe not. But where he'll go from here, he's going to have a lot of influence in the GOP going forward, even if he steps back from politics. So that will be his prerogative. Like, will he take a more backseat role and only come around during election season? We'll see. But his influence and his America First kind of movement is not going anywhere, and that is something that this country will have to continue to have discussions about. And that's where both sides of the argument come into play, because if you want to do something specific to help people, that shouldn't be a partisan issue, even though it is. On the methodology is a partisan issue, but the fact that you want to help people, it is not, right? So I want to have discussions with people from both sides on how to solve specific issues, because that's the only way that kind of large groups of people can come together, because the more complexity you add, the more people will bail out, because it's like, well, I'm down with 1, 2, and 3, but everything after that is not for me, so I'm out. So if Trump can, stick with America first and be influential from the backseat, I think that'd be a good thing for America.
Marcus, what do you see here? Is Trump's ideology such that it is that, because remember, keep in mind, 72, 73, 74 million as of this recording did vote for the president. And that's also a record number for any candidate from the GOP. So, in thinking about, again, these next few years, okay, in this, in this era, where do these guys go? And I remember you were one of the first people to predict back in 2016 with even raised eyebrows from some friends, even myself, where it's like, you predicted that Trump was going to win.
Yeah.
So, and even again in this cycle. So it's like, where does this go? Is kind of this whole thing of, for lack of a better term, Trumpism, is that the wave of the future for these GOP candidates going forward? And especially if you think about somebody like, say, Larry Hogan, who may very well run in 2024, and some of these others. What do you think?
Okay, the GOP is in trouble. I'll just say it point blank, period. Donald Trump stretched the party so far right that people like Mitch McConnell look like they're centrists, which is completely absurd. And we've never had a situation like this occur in American history. The unfortunate thing is that on the left side, the Squad exists, and they are incredibly popular, and they advocate for things that common sense, non-political people can popularly agree with without a great deal of deep knowledge about politics. So what that unfortunately creates is a center lane, which is politics as usual and politics as expected, that literally people have no inclination to want to care about, because the stuff that you want to care about is the exciting stuff, the stuff that gets you motivated. And Donald Trump is going to continue to stay on the far right, because that is where his base is, insofar as just being a human being able to access and leverage money, and being able to access and leverage any kind of support for himself as a entrepreneur. So I fully expect him to be entrenched in the far right, and to be a person who, everything he says, he's an expert, because he was the president for 4 years. So if he says anything, if he says the sky's purple, then he was the president. So, there's some level of veracity to what he's saying. So I think that that's important to note. I think that neutralizing Trump is going to be hard. And I think that if the left wants to proceed forward, they shouldn't think so much about neutralizing Trump as much as being able to create a space between the far left and the center that is amenable. Because we can see that they have a base that can win an election numerically. Like, numerically, no matter what happens. I don't think that there's 5 million ways that you can flip the vote tally for the overall presidential election for, the 150 million people that voted. So the left has an advantage, and they need to be able to find a way to center that advantage so that this hubbub that comes from the right is not so impactful. But it will be there, and I definitely expect Trump to be at the forefront of that, because he absolutely, for a social, economic reason, has to be there. So that's just a couple of things to think about. But I think that that's definitely the main point of concern, is that the Republican Party is absolutely in deep trouble.
And then looking at the left, let me first start off with you, Raheem, and then Kristen to close off the conversation. Raheem, think about this. Where do the Democrats go from here? Now we have Joe Biden as the president-elect. Does he meet the moment in the time of the two global pandemics, not just this coronavirus pandemic, but in terms of the issues of race and injustice. And in thinking about some of the stuff that has been kind of sort of talked about in the run up to the election, we do want to keep in mind that he did write the 94 crime bill, although I will say to his credit, he has since apologized for that. And he put Antonin Scalia and was instrumental in putting Clarence Thomas on the court. So there was a lot of talk about that there. So, and then what about the pressure of the progressives in all of this? What do you see here, Raheem, going forward for the Democrats? What do they have to learn here?
Like I mentioned earlier, I fully expect the Democrats to lose the House in 2022 just because of gerrymandering. Like that's just going to happen. The Republicans are going to work hard to make sure that their districts are Republican and really like put Democrats in many of these states in the far regions to blunt their influence. I mean, I think that uh, in the last I think the last Republican to win a popular election with 50% of votes like George Bush in 1988, and I think George W. Bush was like the last one to win with like a high like the most votes, whatever. So and that happens every congressional cycle. I think even in 2018, Democrats I think had like 9 or 10 million more, but didn't make that much of a gain, congruent with like the number proportionate with the numbers of votes that they gained in 2018. That's because of redistricting. So that's going to be a big issue. As for Biden, he's a centrist. Like that's what he's always been. Like he's been that since I remember reading a profile of him a couple of weeks ago actually no, I'm sorry, like September, and he talked about his childhood and how, or when he was a young man in the 60s, how he didn't really march for civil rights. He didn't do much like that because that's just not like that's just he cares about this stuff. He talks about it, but he also is a centrist. That's just what he is, and so I think if he wants to have a successful presidency, like Marcus mentioned earlier, Georgia is very imperative because if they don't win both seats in Georgia, which I think is probably not going to happen, McConnell's going to be there. He's going to just blunt everything. There's nothing that you can really do, and that's going to be a huge challenge. So he's going to have to do the thing that Democrats never want to do, which is build power, use the power of the executive branch to push for things. The biggest thing he can do from next year is to advocate for a massive stimulus, a ridiculously big stimulus, even if it's not like realistic. Advocate for it because if you need 5 cents, ask for 10. You don't ask for 5 because you aren't going to give it to you. You have to ask for more just to get what you really want. That's when negotiation comes. When you start off at the smaller end of the table and asking for a smaller side, you're going to get less than what you want. So I think that's the biggest thing you need to do. As for the progressives, and as for Democrats in general, I believe that the biggest takeaway from this election to me is you can't run as I'm not this person, and I think that was a major thing. Unfortunately, the Democrats did this year was that they ran a lot of candidates as I'm not Trump or we're not Trump, but they're good Republicans, and Republicans are like, no, they're all demons and monsters, and they're going to take away everything that you have. So all of them are bad, and Democrats don't run like that. The biggest thing really is come with an economic message. Come with a message that's going to really say like, this is what we're going to do for your pockets. That's what Americans care about. That's how Democrats won the same southern part of the country that we call like white, racist X, Y, and Z or whatever. Granted, a lot of them were like that back then, but they voted Democrat because for a very long time because Democrats had an economic message for them. They worked with organized labor, worked with unions, they advocated for unions, and in turn, they put money in those pockets. I know West Virginia, for instance, was like a Democratic state for like a long time, and they had like Democratic like statewide representatives for a very long time, and now people think it's off limits. So for me, the biggest thing is just think like that, like work, find an economic message that's going to work for the entire country, and try to like advocate for that and push for that. And that's something that they haven't really done since LBJ's Great Society in 1964. The war on poverty. So that'll be something that they if they can figure that out and find like a message, I think that they could make inroads in these areas that they're scared of. And the other thing too, this goes back to what we mentioned earlier regarding like getting to the knocking on doors and getting in people's faces and stuff. There's been a lot of fight in Congress between the candidates about the left, the progressives versus like the centrists and stuff. And what I think that what's being missing here is that the reason why like this chasm happens is because some people are listening to the consultants that are in DC that only haven't left like K Street or Capitol Hill, and ignoring what's going on in people's districts and states and towns and so forth. You know, people are scared of a progressive message, but the reason why they're scared of it is because they see this as progressive. They don't see that you know, my AC bill going up every year is like because of it getting too hot, and that's because of climate change or global warming, stuff like that. That's how you gotta get in these communities and talk to them and listen to them, listen to what they need, and bring a message to them. And I think unfortunately, a lot of Democrats are afraid of that. They don't want to talk to their constituents. They don't want to. They just want to like get the job of I'm in Congress or I'm an elected official, and then that's it. I'm good. I don't need to do much else. And that has to be broken. And if they don't, then like I said before, I'm fully anticipating Democrats lose out 2022, and I think that it'll probably like a decade again of like Congress ruled by Republicans because of this election being such a kind of like a mess on the down ballot side. And the only way you can kind of like go against that is if you really start saying like I'm going to have I'm going to work with your organizers and your activists, and I'm going to have an economic message that is going to talk to the con person, the person that doesn't vote, which a lot of people don't vote in this country. That's because they don't feel that their voice is ever going to be heard. And those are people that are poor. Those are people that are working class. Talk to them. Stop trying to court, you know, wishy-washy moderates. Like go and talk to people that are poor and working class that aren't interested in politics because they haven't seen any change from any candidate, and say like, all right, what do you need from us? Let's help you now. Let's work together. And you can't lose like that, but I just don't think that they've had interest in that in a very long time. So I don't know. I know it sounds pessimistic. I know we should be excited that Biden won, but I'm just anticipating 2022 and just seeing like this is probably going to be the moment when Republicans kind of take over Congress, and then 2024 might be something else.
Well, the jury's out, certainly on a lot of this. And Kristen, just to close this off here, what is the strategy, definitely going forward for the Democrats and the Democratic Party, in terms of what the future holds, and then what is some of the key stuff that Joe Biden should accomplish once he gets in on January 20th?
So I think Raheem really hit on a lot of key points. I think the Democratic Party needs to really take a long, hard look at our messaging. It's something we've struggled with for a long time. I think Obama definitely had success with messaging, but Hillary had a lot of difficulties with messaging. People, you know, it was long-winded, confusing. People didn't completely understand what her agenda was, even though she had a lot of progressive plans in place. And so I think messaging is absolutely important, and the Republican Party is exceptionally talented at that. You know, they have these focus groups, and they come up with these terms that are not based on facts or reality, but guess what? They stick, and they can really impact the way people vote. And so I think that while our messaging needs to be based on facts and reality, I think we need to do a better job at messaging in a way that you know, brings people together, doesn't intimidate people, doesn't I mean, I don't want to say that it has to be centrist. It doesn't. I mean, before I was working on this campaign, was a volunteer organizer for Elizabeth Warren. So, you know, I worked for, or I volunteered for, worked for Democratic candidates that are really, you know, that run the gambit. But I think that, well, and I also want to say that I think Stacey Abrams should have absolutely any position moving forward that she wants, whether that's in like Joe Biden's cabinet, whether she wants to run for governor. But I will just put it out there. I would absolutely love for her to be DNC chair, because I think that she is the most talented organizer I've ever seen. And we're really lacking that on the Democratic side. And I think that she could be someone who could really bring the party together. I think, you know, the left, center, and everyone respects Stacey Abrams. She is a powerhouse, and she can really bring people together and bring people to the table. So I would absolutely love for her to lead our party forward. And as far as Joe Biden goes, you know, I think that ultimately, while, I just made it clear who I supported in the Democratic primary, I do think that ultimately Biden ended up being the right candidate for the moment because of COVID, the pandemic, his standing on the world stage, his name recognition. I think that there are a lot of reasons that he really met the moment. And, let's not it has to be mentioned that we just elected the first ever woman vice president of the
This is
United
true.
States. And that is because Joe Biden made the commitment. And some people didn't agree with that. Some people thought he pigeonholed himself. I didn't think so. I have been advocating for a woman in the White House since I was a child, watching election night with my parents. So I'm absolutely thrilled. And I think that, that is another way in which he met the moment. He didn't just choose a woman, he chose a Black woman, a woman of color, someone who, many women throughout this country, we see ourselves in her. So I think that met the moment in a big way. And while I think that he will, he needs to focus on healthcare, absolutely, and climate change, I think that healthcare and protecting our environment are the two number one priorities, if that's such a thing. But at least in my mind, I know that people across the country, in my own household, in my own family, we all have had our healthcare struggles, and we need a public option at the very least. I mean, I would love for more than that, but I do think that's something that can get accomplished in this Congress, especially if we do pick up 2 Senate seats in Georgia, which I personally think we have a great shot. I hope that everyone on this call who, is passionate about getting them elected is involved. I've already ordered 100 postcards. I'll be making calls, donating. So I think that we have to really keep our eye on the prize there and make sure that we keep the pedal to the metal through January 5th, but also beyond, because Joe Biden, frankly, he is not the future of our party. And he knows that. He's 78 years old, or will be when he's inaugurated. I'm not exactly sure when his birthday is, but he will be the oldest president to ever be inaugurated. And so he's not the future of our party, but I think that he will bring the right people into his cabinet. I think we have some really fantastic rising stars in the Democratic Party, some of which did not win their races, but I don't think they're going away anytime soon. And so I think that we need to just stay focused from, here on out. I don't think we can, pour money into elections 4 months before they happen. I think we need to be on the ground doing grassroots organizing always. We should always be talking to people and trying to understand what their kitchen table issues are. And I think that if we keep doing that and then we form the right messaging around those issues, we'll win.
And Joe Biden, just looking at my information here, by the time that this show airs, Joe Biden will have turned 78 because his birthday is on the 20th of this month, November. So, folks, I think this has been a fascinating conversation here. I think that the jury will be out on what is going to be happening in the Georgia Senate race. That is something that everybody is going to be keeping an eye on. The whole political shift, the movements in the media and everything else is going to shift to one state, Georgia. We know that Andrew Yang and his wife, they moved down to Georgia to be involved in this effort. So we are going to see what happens there. I hope to have you guys again at some point in the near future. So Marcus Dowling, Kristen Foca, Taylor Maupin, Raheem Dawodu Jr., thank you guys so much for joining me today, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Next week on Fit to Speak from the Archives, we'll have the final episode of the first season of Fit to Speak that aired on New Year's Eve 2020 with Solomon Kamajong of the Naboo Cultural Center at the University of Maryland. He's also the president of the Black Faculty and Staff Association on campus. We talked about the university's handling of COVID and the impacts on Black students and what people could expect in 2021. I hope you'll be able to join me. In the meantime, be sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts and be sure to check out our Substack and Patreon pages for exclusive content and to support all the work that we do here. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell on our YouTube channel so that you do not miss any of our episodes. Until next week, I'm Eugene Obah. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, the best things in life are worth saving.